Welcome to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Sharlot Hall Museum. My special guest today in Prescott, Arizona is Rex Hinshaw. Rex and I have known each other for a number of years here, involved with the world's oldest rodeo and Prescott Frontier Days. Rex, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart.
Rex, it's great to have you here. And, before we started the program, we were talking a little bit about family history and the crossroads of a small state. And even though we've grown quite large as Arizona has the last 50 years, we're still kind of here in Prescott and across the state, and we start asking about it. Still a small state where there's a lot of connections to families across time.
Correct. A lot of interconnection, particularly if you were here in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Now, Rex, were you born and raised here in Prescott? Is this your hometown?
No, I was born in Safford, Arizona, and then when I was 2 years old, we moved to Buckeye, and in the mid-50s, my father and his twin brother started coming up here to work with Dr. Fletcher at the Prescott Animal Hospital, and started working in the horse racing industry. And so we started spending our summers up here in 57, 58. And so that's when I started coming up here in the summers in 58.
Well, anybody who's raised in Buckeye in the mid-1950s, the idea that you could come spend part of your summers in the Bradshaw Mountains in the Prescott, Arizona, that you must have been just waiting on the calendar, waiting until you could get up here.
Yeah, it was Memorial Day and Labor Day. Those were the two big days, and that was the race meet up here. And when we went back down to school in Buckeye, it was still pretty hot.
Oh yeah, and are those the glory days of Prescott Downs?
I don't know. I started working as a young kid at Prescott Downs in 1960, and I worked there for 23 summers, mm-hmm. and I really enjoyed it. So I was kind of raised at the facility at the racetrack, and so it's a big part of my life. I think that we probably the late 50s and early 60s. Probably I would consider the glory years of horse racing here in this area.
My dad always talked about Prescott Downs, and that the 4th of July, when the world's oldest rodeo rolled into town, Prescott Downs had to move. Is it true that they would move to Flagstaff?
Yeah, Fort Tut Hill. Mm-hmm. That was a fair meet, and that always happened during our rodeo here. And then our rodeo would end on Sunday, and Sunday afternoon performance. And we had to completely tear down the arena and put back the racetrack, and they'd be grooming the racetrack while we were tearing down the arena, because the next morning at daylight they'd start exercising horses, and they went back to horse racing.
That's what I was really looking forward to having you here on the show, Rex, on a whole variety of topics we're going to cover today. But it's just that view back into time in Prescott, and I think that Prescott Downs is one of those great traditions here in Prescott. There was also the Smoke Eye that was held out at the fairgrounds there, where the rodeo is hosted every year. But those I remember going to the horse races in the 80s, and I was working out at Orem School's summer camp, and we'd come in on a day off into Prescott, and we would take some time to go out to the races, and they were fun. I mean, it was, you had, you had all quarter horse races out there, and and it was a fun little time of the day to get out there and watch the horses race.
They had the thoroughbred and quarter horse races, and I worked up in the judges' stand for about 10 or 11 years, and I was a chart caller and timer. And of course they had electronic timing, but we had to time it by hand in case the electronic timing failed. And we used to call our quarter horse races a 330-yard spasm.
So when you were growing up in Buckeye, did you grow up around animals? Was your father a veterinarian, or tell me a little bit about your background growing up in Buckeye, because it's a very rural area at the time, wasn't it?
Right. My father was a veterinarian, a large animal mostly, but he was the only veterinarian from West Phoenix, which was about 51st Avenue, to Gila Bend. It was a large area of practice, and he actually got his pilot's license so he could fly to some of his things. But I grew up going out on calls at night with my dad. We actually had he had a small animal practice. It was in our home. And so his office, the animal hospital, was one end of our home. So I grew up around animals and the veterinary practice. And some of my fondest memories was going out in the evenings or on weekends with my dad on calls to treat animals or deliver, help deliver animals. And then when he started working at the racetrack, at Arizona Downs and then Turf Paradise. Sometimes on weekends as a little guy, I could go out there with him to Turf Paradise and saddle up a horse and ride all day while he was working at the racetrack.
How about that?
Moon Valley area
Wow.
of Turf Paradise. There wasn't anything there.
No,
I
it's wide open country out there.
Right up to the top of Moon Mountain there and back. Well, I just had to, the rule was I had to have the horse cooled off, brushed, unsaddled, and put away by the time the races were over.
How about that? And I know you're named after your uncle Rex, right? What was your father's name?
Ray.
And were they from Arizona? Were they born and raised here?
No, they were born in Boulder, Colorado, or they were raised in Boulder, Colorado. They both graduated from high school in Boulder and then went to college in Fort Collins. The war interrupted their education as far as being veterinarians, but they were identical twins. They were kind of separated during the war, during World War II. My uncle Rex ended up over in Burma and on the Burma Trail, and he was in the last mounted cavalry unit, and they were riding mules and doing mule trains on the Burma Trail to supply China, our ally at the time.
Fighting for General Stilwell.
Yeah. And my dad was in the Army and then the Navy as a corpsman, and he stayed in stateside. But then when they came back, Arizona paid for the last couple of years of their education at Fort Collins, and in exchange, they both for that they were to come to Arizona and practice for at least a couple of years. And so my father moved to Arizona in 1948 after graduation, and I was born here in Safford in 1949.
Well, I think it's a great family story, and we're very fortunate that your trails have brought you to Prescott, and it sounds like there was a great impression made on you as a boy coming up here in the summers for Prescott. Did you think you would end up here at some point in your life?
You know, it always seemed like my second home, and as I grew older, I enjoyed my summers here working as a teenager and then as a young man, and it always seemed as my second home, and I made lots of good friends here. And so when I graduated from high school, I did go to college down at ASU for a couple of semesters, but it just kind of happened. I needed to get a job and I was starting to raise a family, and this was the logical place to come.
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here and thank our sponsors, Rex, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about the rodeo and your career and how it blossomed here in Prescott, Arizona in the early 1970s. We'll be right back. Step back in time on Saturday, December 6th and experience the magic of Frontier Christmas at Sharlot Hall Museum. Starting after the courthouse lighting ceremony, the museum will glow with holiday cheer. Enjoy complimentary hot cider and cookies, create Victorian-inspired crafts, and stroll through glowing luminarias. Father Christmas himself will be there with special treats for all. Shop unique gifts at the Bashford House Museum store featuring Arizona history books, handmade jewelry, and more. Bring the whole family and celebrate the season in true territorial style. Visit charlottehallmuseum.org for more information. Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Sharlot Hall Museum in Prescott, Arizona. My special guest today is Rex Hinshaw. We're having a great conversation about growing up in Arizona and that special opportunity you had as a boy when your father and uncle became very involved in Prescott Downs and the rodeo, but really the racing industry up here in Prescott. Tell me a little bit about your role today with the rodeo, but did your father come up with some tickets or your uncle some tickets for the rodeo when you were a boy? When was the first time you remember going to the world's oldest rodeo?
My first memory of the rodeo was I was probably about 7, and my dad was the veterinarian for the rodeo. And on that particular performance, it was a nighttime performance, and then my first memory is being there at the rodeo with my dad. And I was on horseback with him and sitting behind him.
How about that?
And out in the arena. And in those days, we would take and put up a portable fence across the middle of the arena during the bull riding.
I remember that.
To cut the size of the arena down. And we were on the outside of that fence during the bull riding, and I wasn't paying much attention, and I'm just sitting there, not holding on anything, just sitting behind my dad. And a bull came and hooked that fence and threw it up in the air, threw it over our heads, and came at us. And my dad, I think he forgot I was behind him, and he whirled that horse around and spurred it, and we took off to get away from the bull. And I wasn't holding on to anything, and I ended up laying out flat on the back of the horse, holding on to his belt loops to hang on. And I remember being really, because the crowd was oohing and on and cheering and laughing, and I remember being embarrassed that I'd almost fallen off a horse in front of all those people at the rodeo. But that was my earliest memory of the rodeo. And then it was in the 1971 during the filming of Junior Bonner when I came back and was around the rodeo, because I was in the wild cow milking. They had wild cow milking at that time. I was in that.
You were in that same performance with my dad.
Yeah. And so that's when I got interested again in the Prescott Frontier days. But I had moved back up here full time in 1968, I guess.
Well, that's those are some great memories there. I think about age 7 is my first memory of going to the rodeo. Probably 1970. I was a camper out at the Orm. I got the chance to spend from a kid from North Hollywood, California, come back to where my dad had been raised at the Orm Ranch, and I have some very good memories of going to the rodeo. And I don't think it was many years later, because my only memories of the rodeo were daytime. So I always thought the Prescott Rodeo, all of my experiences growing up were on the Saturday afternoon matinee after the parade. So it was many years later that I realized that there were nighttime performances. But I think it's those earliest memories that, of what the rodeo means to you and how it's defined. And it's definitely defined by being in those stands on the west end of the arena towards L and K, down towards the roping chutes, and just the excitement of coming into that crowded arena, and the flags and the grand entry, and just everyone's excitement, and the red, white, and blue everywhere, and the announcer's prayer, and the Star-Spangled Banner. It's this kaleidoscope of memories that help kind of define your love of rodeo and Prescott and the 4th of July. I can't say I've had a better 4th of July anywhere than here in Prescott, Arizona.
Well, I think that there's more energy and more patriotism and that kind of thing at our rodeo. I think it's one of the best outdoor rodeos. We just received from our turquoise circuit, which is the circuit that the professional PRCA circuit that we are in. We just received the award for the best large outdoor rodeo in the PRC, or in the turquoise circuit.
That's fantastic. And Rex, you are currently on the board of directors of the Prescott Frontier Days Inc. Is that right?
Prescott Frontier Days Incorporated. Yeah, I'm the vice president of the board of directors.
Right. And is this your first? You have served this is not your first time, not your first rodeo that
No.
you've served as a leader of the in its evolution from the era of the JCs to the present.
I joined the rodeo committee for the first time in 1972, the year after Junior Bonner, and I was on the rodeo committee, and it was run by the JCs, a little different organization, and a different organizational chart. But I worked my way up through, was arena boss in 73, I believe, or assistant arena boss, I don't remember, and then rodeo boss. And then in 1978, I was the overall chairman of the Prescott Frontier Days. And that was the last year that the JCs ran it. And the JCs closed shop, basically, in the end of 1978. So in 1978, for the 79 year, past rodeo chairmen, Cam Smith and Rich Farah, and past rodeo chairmen for the JCs, we got together and we sat down and we wrote the bylaws and incorporation papers to create Prescott Frontier Days Incorporated, and we switched it from JCs, which is a young man's organization, to a family-oriented organization. And so I was on the board of directors in 79 and 80, the charter board of directors for Prescott Frontier Days. And then I took a long break after that in 81, I believe. It had been a long 8-9 years for me.
Yeah, that's right. Big era of transition.
Yeah. And so I didn't come back to the committee until about 11, 12 years ago when I came back and moved back to Payson, from Payson to Prescott.
Right.
And rejoined the committee.
So let's talk a little bit about that time period. You said you moved back to Prescott in 1968, and you've spent your career as an architect. And I also have read that you're a great illustrator. I've seen some of your illustrations, and you like to draw and paint, so you're an artist as well. So tell me about, making the decision to come back up to Prescott in the late 1960s and to the beginning of your career.
Well, I was an art student in college, and I was down at ASU, and I was married, newly married, and going to have a baby, and needed to start making a living. And my new father-in-law worked for the state highway department here, and so with my art background, I don't have any background, formal training in architecture or drafting at the time, but I could print. And so I came up and I applied for a job with the state highway department. Because I could print, they hired me and put me in the design department, and they taught me how to draft. And so after a couple of years working in the state highway department, one of the employees there decided he'd like to build a house. And he asked me if I thought I could draw a set of plans for his house. And I said, I don't know, I've never drawn a set of plans before, but I'd give it a try. So I went and bought some books on house plans, and he and his family and I sat down and we drew up a set of plans, and I liked it. So from that point on, I started looking towards architecture as a career. And I went and found a job for a year or so with Ramada Inns, got a little structural background behind me, and then I came back up here to Prescott again and started working for one of the premier architects, or the premier architect in Prescott at the time, which was George Allen. And George, it was Allen Olson, and then Allen Olson Scarborough Architects. And I started working for him in the early 70s, or 70, I guess. And so that's where I got my start in architecture here. And then later on in life, I went and took exams to become a licensed architect. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an exciting part of your life right there. And I know that at that time period, you're getting settled in here with your family, your career is taking off, and you're getting involved in the rodeo. We're going to take another quick break and thank our sponsors. And we're going to come back and talk about Junior Bonner. And you've got a great story I know about during the filmmaking of Junior Bonner, but also one of the first significant architectural events in your life, the Fremont House here at Sharlot Hall Museum. So we'll be right back here on Arizona Roundup with Rex Hinshaw. Travel back in time this holiday season with Sharlot Hall Museum's A Prescott Christmas Carol. It's the classic tale you love, told with a frontier twist. Experience this old-time radio show, complete with live sound effects, audience participation, and a cast of local Prescott stars. Join us Thursday, December 11th for 2 performances at 5 and 7 p.m. It's a truly unique holiday evening. Tickets are just $25. Seating is limited, so get yours today at charlottehallmuseum.org. That's charlottehallmuseum.org. Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Sharlot Hall Museum. And my special guest today is Rex Hinshaw. And we have been talking a great deal about growing up in Arizona, life in Prescott, and the beginning of Rex's career as an architect. And one of the that early 1970s, there was a lot happening here in Prescott. And one of the, it's an era that you can point to in which filmmakers rediscovered Prescott, Arizona, and Yavapai County. You know, movies like Billy Jack were filmed here, and then a rodeo picture very close to my heart, a family story, Junior Bonner, which was penned by my father, Jeb Rosebrook, a bouquet to his adopted hometown of Prescott in Yavapai County. And that rodeo, where this is coming up in 2026, will be 55 years since that production company descended on Prescott in June of 1971, and you know, everybody's hometown welcomed them, embraced them, and men like Bill Pierce and, you know, John and Linda Keekeffer and the rodeo, they, you know, with Casey Tibbs, they just embraced this company of Steve McQueen and Robert Preston and Ida Lupino and these famous actors and their crew, but they melded into the community, and they filmed all over the county. Now, you had an interaction with the film crew out in Humboldt. Mm-hmm. They were filming twice, and they were filming out at both at Riata Pass and on a location. I think there's a bar out there still known as Billy Jack's, and there's a location they're going to be building the Dewey Humboldt Historical Museum. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that location. You were a young man at that time in your early 20s.
Right. I was 22 years old, and the name of it back then was Billy's Bar, and there was a gas station right next to it. In one of the first scene, or towards the end of the first scene of the Junior Bonner, he gets up and he's out to Willow Lake and gets up. That's where that's seen in the morning, and gets in his car and heads down the road, and he stops for gas. And a young boy comes and puts the gas in, and then he goes and buys some fruit.
That's right.
And during that scene, filming of that scene, a friend of mine and I were in Billy's Bar shooting pool. And after they told us we could watch from inside, but to stay away from the window so you couldn't see our reflection, or you couldn't see us, you know, through the window. So we watched that scene being filmed from inside the bar there. And after they were done filming, Sam Peckinpah and Steve McQueen came in, and I was shooting pool, and Steve McQueen asked if he could shoot pool, and I shot about 4 or 5 games with Steve McQueen, and I was a pretty good pool shot at the time, and I beat him, and Sam Peckinpah called me over and asked me, said, "Son, you know who this is, don't you? You better let him win." And Steve McQueen heard that, and he turns around and he said, "He better not let me win." So anyway, it was maybe 3-4 days later out at Riata Pass on a Saturday night, and I lived out that way, and I was there sitting at a table by myself, which I usually did on Saturday nights, and eating my dinner, and Steve McQueen, Sam Peckinpah, Casey Tibbs, and Ben Johnson came in. Well, the place was packed. There wasn't any tables. And Steve McQueen looked over and saw that and recognized me from having shot pool with me. And he came over and asked me if I minded if they joined me for dinner. And so the 4 of them sat down. Oh, and my. I'm just sitting there with my jaw hanging open. And I had met Ben Johnson once or twice before, but I'd never met Casey Tibbs. And so they sat there and we all had dinner, and they bought dinner for me, and I was able to I got my impression of Sam Peckinpah and Casey Tibbs. But
what a crew! What a crew!
Steve McQueen was very polite and fairly quiet and very polite and unassuming. And of course, Ben Johnson was just a real gentleman. He was a Western cowboy gentleman.
Oh, that's for sure.
But I've never forgotten that. That was a real highlight in a young man's
life.
That's a
real unforgettable evening. And Casey Tibbs and my dad became good friends on the shoot. Most of the crew lived in the Prescottonian for the summer. Mm-hmm. I think some of them might have been in the Ramada, and then they had houses for Sam and Steve and Lucian Ballard, who was the cinematographer. But all the other actors, Ida Lupino, Ben Johnson, Casey Tibbs, all of them stayed in the Prescottonian. And Dub Taylor, who was the bartender,
right,
and Don Redberry, and Bill McKinney, and it was a great cast. And after the rodeo, and we're all little kids, Dub Taylor took me out for a Jeep ride, I call it a Jeep. I think he had one of those Toyota Land Cruisers, and he took me out on 4-wheel driving. And but Casey loved my mom's cooking, and my mom came over and visited the set a couple of times, and as kids we were there a little bit that summer. And but Casey lived in Hollywood, and the next time I saw Casey, he had a French girlfriend, and they lived in a tower in Hollywood. And I remember they would come to dinner, or Casey would come by himself, and he was just he didn't have family, he didn't have any children, and so he would come to our house and he would take us out horseback riding. And there was two sides to Casey, with the guys, and then with at our house as a family. But he loved my mom's mashed potatoes and meatloaf. And
that's neat. He was pretty Hollywood or flashy. Mm-hmm. He was kind of the precursor to Larry Mahan.
That's right.
He was, but he was the first of that kind of a cowboy celebrity, or a rodeo athlete celebrity.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so yeah, that was great memories from that film, and such an impact on Prescott, Arizona, mm-hmm. and the rodeo. And it's still, when people go to sit back and watch Junior Bonner, it has. It's a time capsule because they filmed everything live at the rodeo and the parade. And mm-hmm. so it's really remarkable to go back and look at it and go, what happened to the Shriners? But so much of the parade is still the same and so exciting. Mm-hmm. And obviously, this next July, we're planning there's going to be a big time parade in Prescott, Arizona on the 4th of July this year. We're celebrating America's 250.
America's 250.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, celebrating American history is something we do very well here, I believe, at Sharlot Hall Museum. And you were involved in a very historic move of one of our most important homes here in Prescott, the Fremont House. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the Fremont House at Sharlot Hall Museum.
Well, it was in late 71, early 72 when I was working with George Allen still. That year we had well, it was my last year working for George until in the 90s, but we got a call said that the church was willing to sell that or donate that to the Historical Society, and but it had been remodeled, and it was a duplex, I believe, is what they were using it as at the time. And had been remodeled. And so they asked George and I if we could go and try to figure out what the original walls, where the original walls were, and what the original floor plan was, so they could remove the parts that weren't original to it, and we could come up with a floor plan so you could restore it and move it here. So we went over there, and I ended up. George was working on something else, so I ended up going over there and trying to locate the original walls inside. And the structure of the building is it turns out, is the walls outside and inside are solid wood. They're pine, 1 by 12s, probably 1 by 10s, 1 by 12s, running 2 different directions. Vertical and horizontal, and those are the structure of the walls. They're not studs like we do nowadays. And so I was trying to figure out how to find the original walls, And only thing I could figure out was I was knocking on it with my knuckles, and that wasn't working too well to try to find walls that were studs and sheetrock and studs. So I got a hammer out, and I started hitting all the walls with the hammer. And if my hammer went through the wall, that wasn't an original wall.
Oh, man, that's interesting.
So I walked through this whole house and, hitting walls with this hammer to determine which walls had been added later on, which walls were the original walls. And then I started peeling off the layers of wallpaper. And I believe on the original walls, there was 4 to 6 layers of wallpaper, and then got down to the original layer of cotton linen was over the rough sawn boards. It's all rough sawn, and probably milled here, I'm sure.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, and so I was able to determine, what the original wall covering was, the linen, because it was still there. All the other layers of wallpaper over the decades had just been laid over on top of each other. And so I was able to peel that back so we could see the structure, and then draw a floor plan of what the house was originally. And then it was ready to be moved over here to Sharlot Hall. And I don't remember exactly how it happened. I believe it was in the morning. I get a call, and they had run into a problem. Well, they had it jacked up, and I'm sure it was Bernie Fisher's moving company that was moving it. And they had jacked it up and got it ready to move, but there were some power lines that were lower than the peak of the roof. And so...
Is this on Gurley?
It was on Union Street.
Union Street,
because
okay.
It had been originally built on Gurley in 1875, I believe. And then in early 1900s moved from the Gurley Street location to the Union Street, next to the church there, Episcopal Church, to make way for the Carnegie Library. But so it was on Union Street where they were having trouble with the power lines running across there. And so before I could get down there to take a look, and they didn't want a delay in the move because the move had been scheduled, and it was moving a house down the street, much like the Bashford house later on, and so you had to get that scheduled. And so I get down there, and they said, "Well, we've solved the problem," and a contractor got up on top of the roof and cut the peak of the roof off with a chainsaw.
Oh my God!
And in that construction in those days, the roof was held together with what we call a collar tie, kind of a precursor to trusses. And it's a horizontal piece that's about 2/3 of the way up or 1/3 of the way down from the peak, and a horizontal member, and that's what creates the lateral strength. Well, that's the only thing keeping the building from folding in like a house of cards. And so in a panic, I called George. George comes down there, and we had them put in some temporary bracing so they could actually move it and then get it moved over here, and which they did. We rode behind them hoping that it wouldn't fold up as it did.
Oh, my.
And we get it over here and got it put, and then we made sure that they put the peak of the roof and repaired that immediately so it would go back and give it back its structural integrity. But that was kind of a scary thing. So that's why it sticks in my mind, that in kind of the act of going through it and discovering the old original walls and how it was built at the time, which I was just a couple of years into my architectural career.
Right.
And so that was really interesting for me to see that it was built with solid wood like that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take another quick break and then thank our sponsors and come back and talk a little bit more about John C. Fremont, our territorial governor, and the Fremont House, and why it's such an important part of Prescott history. We'll be right back with Rex Hinshaw.
For over 45 years, Blind Brothers Arizona has been the heart of window style in Prescott. From blinds, shutters, drapes, they will custom design and install with expert precision, tailored just to you, whether it's for your home or your office. You can trust the name that locals rely on. Visit blindbrothersarizona.com today or call them at 928-776-1845. Once again, that's 928-776-1845 for a free consultation. Blind Brothers Arizona, the original since 1979.
Welcome back to Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Sharlot Hall Museum. And my special guest today is Rex Hinshaw, and we're having a great conversation about family, about Arizona history, about Rex's grand career, his career and development as a leading architect here in Prescott and Payson and Central Arizona, but also about history and heritage and why it's important to Prescott and how Sharlot Hall Museum has grown into one of the state's leaders in preserving our history and heritage. And part of that, and I think that not a lot of people understand how important it is, as a living history center at Sharlot Hall Museum, we're also an architectural history site. We have a great variety of historic original historic structures, such as the Territorial Governor's Mansion, which our museum is built around. It has never moved, and it's the same place it was built in 1864, on a little bit of a bluff, a little hill above the downtown plaza as that territorial town of miners and settlers was developing Prescott. But just in that mansion, you've probably been through the mansion a number of times, Rex, and
oh yeah,
it's it was called a mansion because it was like 2,000 square feet, which was a huge, very large building when you consider in 1864 most people were living rough in log cabins and tents, and it stood as the symbol of the territorial government of the newest territory in Arizona in the middle of the Civil War. And just 11 years later, there's an entrepreneur who builds this beautiful home in downtown Prescott. He's an entrepreneur that builds a boarding house, but it doesn't look like any of the log cabins from the first decade. Can you describe a little bit about how this is the part of modern Prescott in 1875?
Well, they call that architecture New England traditional or New England, but that's a pretty sophisticated structure and sophisticated type of construction, given that we're log cabins and tents. And
there's no railroads coming into town yet, so everything has to be done by hand here.
And all the wood and materials come from here. And so from an architectural standpoint, quite a leap in a short period of time, and shows how the town was changing fairly rapidly as it grew and was becoming known.
Yeah, I think on our campus you can see the juxtaposition between what was modern in 1875 and present day. You can go across America and historic communities, and the architecture holds up. I mean, it's still considered a very sophisticated home in terms of its architecture for its era, across from that rough-hewn ponderosa pine territorial governor's mansion. It's General Fremont had been appointed territorial governor, and he never lived in the log cabin. He chose to live in this boarding house in downtown Prescott, and you think that would have been one of the nicest homes at the time?
I would bet that his wife had a lot to do with that.
Yeah,
decision.
Sure, and they had a young daughter with them, and
right.
He's not known for being a very active territorial governor. He had eyes on the presidency. He spent a lot of time traveling, trying to promote himself. But he definitely, in part of society, and his wife was from the East, and that the fact that you needed a home to entertain if you were going to be the first lady of the Arizona Territory.
Right. I think that talking about the different architecture here, even going back to Fort Misery, the cabin here, and you can see time has passed here. I think that's one of the really unique and great things about this campus here. The next step, I would say, in architecture from the Fremont would be the Bashford House.
Right.
Larger, I believe that's a Queen Anne style, and Victorian.
Has some
turrets and that kind of thing. So I think that's, I think the architecture that's demonstrated here is a significant part of the charm and the history of, or the showing of the history of our area.
Yeah, and right on the other side of the Fremont House is the very practical 1920s, 1930s. Our transportation building is poured concrete walls and with a tin roof. Practical, affordable, utilitarian. It's interesting to see the juxtaposition of the three buildings in a row right there. Then, of course, with the Bashford House next to it. I don't know. I think we now are recognized as an arboretum, and I think just talking to you, Rex, we have an opportunity probably to really develop an architectural tour that interprets our campus more than we're doing right now.
I would say that would be an important thing to do. I mean, we're still going through, as we can see, read in the newspaper and hear on the radio, architectural discussions in this town. There are several major things happening around the square and around the plaza, and so I think an architectural discussion is probably appropriate in this area.
By the way, I just Melissa Ruffner, Elizabeth Ruffner, would be very glad that you corrected yourself and called it a plaza. I was living in Iowa City for a number of years, and I remember getting an email and a phone call from Elizabeth reminding me that in True West Magazine I had called it the square, and that it is a plaza. And please remember to look at the original plat, Stuart, that it is called a plaza. Right?
Absolutely. It's not square, it's rectangular in shape, and it's on the original map it's called the plaza.
Right.
And so it's just kind of growing up here as kids, as a slang kind of, we call it square.
You live in the Midwest, every town's got a town square, right? But so when you were involved in moving this house, obviously it was quite the spectacle to see it being moved onto campus. The campus wasn't fenced yet. Were you involved in restoring it, the next step, and getting it to where it is today?
Not so much in the interior finishes.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't get into that. More from the standpoint of the floor plan and structural aspects of it, and that, not so much in the interior finishes. So I enjoy going in it and discovering things and get the feeling I get, because I remember being in it when we were tearing it, stripping it down inside. I remember doing that and being in it then, and to go into it now and get a feel for how they actually lived, and the furniture and the way they lived. It was just it's a feeling of discovery, and I enjoy it every time I go into it.
Well, Rex, I think this is an opportunity for us at some point to have a forum here on campus about the architecture of Sharlot Hall Museum and our important architectural sites here on our campus. And I think we could even probably do at some point a broadcast from inside the Fremont House. And I would love to be able to walk with you and talk to you in the building more about the details in person in the building about, this room here. This was where the walls where they had added on a room. And I think this is also a great opportunity to announce we're putting together a plan for next year and during our 250th anniversary as a country in AZ 250 to do some oral history programs about the Fremont House and the Bashford House. You and I can be having a cup of coffee, and you've reminded me over time of some great stories here in Prescott. And I believe we have a great audience of men and women who grew up here in Prescott or had moved here and as young adults. when their families have been here a long time and have great memories of these significant moments in Prescott. And the moving of the Fremont House and the Bashford House were fairly significant and stand out as memories of the 1970s.
Correct.
And were you here when the Bashford House moved as well?
All right. Oh yeah. That picture that keeps showing up that was taken from up Gurley Street, probably from right about where Grove hits Gurley, of the house coming down Gurley Street. I was probably standing right next to where I was standing right on the corner up here of right next to the church on Summit when they moved it and watched it move. The JCs had a little bit of Cam Smith and the JCs.
There is a rodeo connection with the Bashford House.
With the Bashford House. We were going to the JCs. We're thinking of renting it and making it our clubhouse. And Cam Smith and a couple other of the prominent JCs said, "No, we need to get this. We need to come down here."
Wasn't Bill Pierce involved with that a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the other Pierce family, the Mike Pierce, right? The Pierce family owned the house prior to, right? Isn't that correct?
I believe so.
Yeah. So, well, Rex, I really appreciate you coming on to Arizona Roundup today. We have had a great afternoon speaking about history of Prescott, your career. I think we're going to have you on sooner than later. Talk a little bit about what's happening next year with the rodeo, but also some more great stories of Prescott and its architectural history. Thanks for being on the show, Rex.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. And we'll see you next week on Arizona Roundup.